All right, I'm gonna have to. You might be able to hear me now, but the settings on my mic were different, so I have to fix it. Thank you for that. See, I was already like, I'm gonna not say the things that might happen, and they happen anyway. But we just roll with the punches. It's not about avoiding the tech issues. It's like, what do we do when the tech issues are happening? So let's get it set up here. People on TikTok probably can't hear me either. Let's see. It might be working. And it's so crazy because every time I go to do a live, right before live, I'm like, let's double check the tech. Let's go through all the settings. And everything is fine. And then I go live and suddenly it's like, ha 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 ha, no. You thought it was okay, but it is absolutely not. Okay, so this is headphones, but that doesn't really matter. Here. Crystal. We'll start with this. Okay, so right now we just have regular mic, but I'm sure you probably hear my fan in the background. So hello if you're watching on YouTube, hello if you're watching on TikTok while I am fixing up these tech issues that we are having right now. Hello, hello, hello. Glad to have you here. It's been a very long time since I've been on live, honestly. Probably upwards of 2 weeks. So I apologize, but also life happens. And I was in recovery mode for burnout. But it wasn't language burnout, thankfully. Sometimes it's because of language learning, or it used to be frequently because of language learning, but now it's just life. So it was like, let me try to gain energy, recuperate, recover, especially because I have lots of exciting things coming up in the next few weeks. And so I'm like, I'm going to need all the energy I could get. Oh, having simultaneous life burnout. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Now let me try to fix the audio. Thank you. I try to embody what I, preach as much as possible. And I'm like, I can't tell people to be kind to to be kind to themselves and to manage your energy in a way that works for you, replenish it and all these things. I can't tell people all these things and then, be the epitome of the thing I tell people to avoid. It's not just hypocritical of me, but then it's also like, well, do you really know what you're talking about, Bront'e? Because you don't seem well with what you're doing. So no, yeah, I love breaks. I love breaks for like life, just like, okay, we're gonna shut down life, and usually mine is like, let's read for hours, let's play video games for hours. Might do a little bit of a weird thing, but it should be fixed now. And then let's go over to TikTok. Often do what I say, not what I do. So bad about my own advice. So I can be like that as well. So, it happens. Hey, Sapphire. Hey, you were in recovery mode too? Just tired, and then you had surgery. Okay. They did like 3 hours of studying yesterday, so you feel better. I mean, you were in double recovery, like literal recovery because of surgery, and then just like mental recovery as well. But I'm glad you're back on track. I am back on track too. We're all gonna be able to handle this thing called life. Okay, Crystal sound on TikTok. How are we doing with audio? Okay, we're good. All right, so I have 3 topics that I want to talk about today. As I'm talking through these topics at literally any point in time, feel free to just drop questions in the chat, either on TikTok or on YouTube. But I wanted to focus on talking about 3 study strategies that I love. Probably heard me talk about all 3 at some point or another. And I'm going to put it all here. Now, if you've never attended these kinds of lives before, because sometimes I do just chit chat live, sometimes I'll do co-working or playing video games. This live is it is more planned out than the other one. So I do have things that I want to go over, and I have notes. So I'll be looking at my screen every once in a while, because what I do is we talk live. So if you attend live, you get to see all the fun stuff. But if you don't get to show up live, I take the video and I cut it up and I put it back on YouTube. And so I want it to have a little bit more structure than us winging it in our conversations. But that doesn't mean we can't chit chat. That doesn't mean we can't just, deviate or switch into a different topic for a little bit. But the 3 strategies that I want to talk about are sentence building, which is my favorite strategy, and actually what I've been doing for the past 2 months, like heavy focus on it. Shadowing, which is my go-to for speaking and improving my intonation. And then comprehensible input, which I know I've made a few videos on TikTok about, and I have a blog post on. So I want to break all those things down, answer questions. Also, if there are other strategies people are looking for, want to share those as well. But these are the 3 that we're going to focus on for today. And I figured we could start off with comprehensible input. If you've never heard me talk about comprehensible input before, or you've literally never heard of it before, comprehensible input is really just any content, whether it's audio or like written stories, text, whatever it is, that is slightly above the level that you are currently at. So basically, it is easy enough that you can understand things in context, but it is hard enough or difficult enough that it is challenging you to interpret things that, the person is saying or that is written. You love shadowing, sing at least 2 songs in all 4 languages. Okay, so we have a shadowing fan here. Love it. Yeah, I do it all the time. And my little bubble where I'm kind of saying gibberish because I'm not paying attention to what people are saying. But when it comes to comprehensible input, it's comprehensible input for you because there's not like a universal resource. It's not like you go on YouTube or you Google comprehensible input, you find something and it's like, this is comprehensible input for everyone. Comprehensible means that you can understand it. So what is comprehensible input to one person might actually be gibberish or too complicated for another person. So you really have to dial into what you can understand personally. But things are explained within the content. So sometimes there's content that we listen to or read that doesn't really explain things well because it expects you to know what they're talking about. That might not be comprehensible input for most people, but there might be, phrase videos, podcasts that have a theme, get ready with me videos, things like that they're kind of explaining what they're doing, and there's visuals involved a lot of the time to help you understand. Or with a book, they're building the story to help you understand what these words and what these grammar points mean in context. Definitely want to shadow more. Yes, it can be so helpful. Absolutely. And so I love comprehensible input because it really helps us to do kind of what we do in our native language, which is understand words in context. There are a lot of words that we know in our native language when someone else, I don't know if anyone else has had this experience, but I have, where some of my friends who are not native English speakers, when we're talking about something, they bring up a word and they're like, Bront'e, what does this word mean? And for a moment, I'm like, it's sort of like, and I don't have an actual definition without using the word in the definition. And so I either have to actually look it up to give a better explanation, or that's when I go into stories and comparisons. I'm like, well, it's kind of like this thing. It's a little bit like that. It's used sometimes in these situations, which is the comprehensible input part, because I'm explaining the words in our language, in English, versus defaulting or switching to like my friend's native language, maybe like Japanese or Spanish, and explaining it to them in that language. So I think most of the resources, if not every resource that I use, minus things for Russian, because Russian is still baby beginner. No, actually, no, that's a lie. Okay, 95% of the resources that I use are comprehensible input resources. So even with my Russian, where I barely understand what's going on, I listen to podcasts completely in Russian. And sometimes the Russian podcast is explaining things in Russian about the words that it's teaching. And I'm like, okay, I think I understood what that is through context. Now, a lot of times, because it's a beginner language, I still have to look things up. There's still a lot of things I don't know. But for languages I'm more familiar with and more comfortable using, like Spanish, Japanese, Korean, and French to an extent, I still do that with those as well, because it also helps you to shift out of leaning on your native language. So at some point in our language studies, it is really important for us to stop using our native language and start, going into like monolingual learning. So using the language to learn the language, using Japanese to help us learn Japanese, using Italian to help us learn Italian. And so comprehensible input can help with that, because it gives you something that, one, you chose the resource. 90% of the time you weren't forced to listen or to read that thing. So you chose the resource. Hopefully it's something of interest to you. And so you have that motivation of, I want to understand this because I like it, or I want to understand this because it's interesting. And you're putting all of the things that you've learned into practice. You're like, okay, how much of this do I understand? You might use even more specific strategies around comprehensible input, like sentence mining. You might decide to do summaries afterwards, either verbal summaries and recording yourself or writing them down. But comprehensible input is like the core. You're like, I'm going to start with this kind of resource. It's more like a resource than a strategy, I guess. It's a little murky area. But when we're learning words, we take in that information based on, direct definition, or someone explaining with an image, a situation, a comparison. We take that info in, and then we form our own understanding, or we develop that idea even further based on more context. When we see other people using it, when we start to use it, and someone might say, oh, we don't use that word that way. We actually use this word instead. Or like, technically that's correct, but no one ever says that. How many of us have said that or have heard that from someone who knows the language that we're learning? And so I think it's one of the best things that you can do for your language studies long term. Yes, stayed away from monolingual studies for so long because I felt intimidated. But once I gave it a try, it was more helpful and easier than I expected. Sometimes you just got to dive in and do it. And that's where comprehensible input can help, because sometimes people feel like when you're diving into a resource or doing monolingual learning, diving into something that is almost entirely in the language you're learning, I feel like I have to go straight to native content. And you don't. Like, I have tons of people that I have worked with and am working with that watch a lot of children's like movies and cartoons. Like, Disney is translated in so many languages. Whether you are a Disney fan or not, like, that's bare minimum. You could just watch Disney on repeat and then download the songs and listen to Disney on repeat. And you could learn from that, because they're talking like real people. They're having conversations with other people. They're talking about real, like, experiences, even if it's fantasy, even if there's like talking animals or whatever. Like, it's still grounded in something real, even if it's a little exaggerated or cartoony in a way. Like, you could talk like that and people might just go, oh, that's a little weird, but they're not gonna misunderstand you completely if you sound like Elsa or if you sound like, I don't know, another character. So definitely there are tons of resources that you can try. But I also recognize that some people, whether you're watching this live or in the replay, some people are learning indigenous languages that are not as widely translated, and there are not many resources that are available for this thing. I have helped some people find I love looking for resources. Like, that's my thing. I made a whole section in a guide just on how to find resources. Like, I'm okay with that. So if you need support with that or you're not sure where to start, definitely let me know. But I also just wanted to point out, I kind of talked about it a little bit, the two things to keep in mind when you're using comprehensible input. You want to make sure that the resource is not too easy and too difficult. Because if it's too easy, you're going to be like, oh, I'm great at this. I understand everything. This is nice. And that's a good confidence boost, but it's not comprehensible input. It's not doing the thing that it's supposed to be doing. Save the easy content for something like a progress log or progress report, where you are checking to see how much you know and sort of recording it in like a Notion spread, like database, or in your notebook, or even just recordings on your phone. You're like, this is my log of the progress I'm making in X language. Easy content is great for that because you can be like, I understand all of these things. Look at how amazing that is. But for comprehensible input, you need it to be just above that level. But you also don't want it to be too complicated, because if it is too difficult, you are not going to do it. You are going to have that, video, audio, podcast on, and then you're going to find way too much you don't understand, way too much that you have to look up in a dictionary. And then you're just going to say, you know what? Never mind. This does not work for me. And then you're going to, do something else. It does work, but you have to find the right resource for you. And it takes trial and error. Like it does. But once you kind of know what you're looking for, whether it's difficulty in vocab and grammar or just topics, it becomes easier over time. Easy stuff is nice for when you're feeling down. Yes, but it's not going to push you. Absolutely. Exactly. Easy stuff is good for when your confidence is low and you just need that boost of like, oh, I'm not as bad as I thought I was. I actually do know what I'm doing, but it is not for this comprehensible input work. Absolutely. And so how do you do this? I actually have a few videos on my TikTok account, and I have a whole blog post on like what comprehensible input is and how to do it. And I think in my blog post, off the top of my head, I think I included some additional links if people want to read up on it, because I didn't invent this. This is not my idea, but it's pretty well known in the language learning community. But basically, you just have to find the resource, and then you have to decide what strategy you're attaching to it. So for example, and I'm actually going to open it up on my phone right now. Let's say, for example, I decide, what's this podcast? Just earlier today, I was listening to the Real Japanese podcast. Nihongo no Benkyou Podcast. And essentially, it's entirely in Japanese. She was explaining things like, what was it? Like trains, Tokyo trains. And then there was, like her week, some cultural ideas. And so essentially, that's going to be my comprehensible input. And I'm going to listen to it and just say, how much of this do I understand? Do I understand what she's saying? I don't have to understand every individual word, because this isn't intensive listening. The goal is, by the end of this podcast, did I understand the topic of Tokyo trains? Yes. Yes, I did. Because she was talking about, the 4 different trains she brought up, and how long it takes, and, the music is different on different lines and in different areas. Like, I understood the gist. Could I tell you which city she was talking about? No, because I wasn't paying that close attention, to be honest. But I could go back and repeat it again a few times as a strategy. And so I have the resource, and then my strategy is, maybe, well, in my case, it was just extensive listening. So I'm just like listening for the sake of listening and immersion, and then I'm moving on. That's my strategy. So you find the resource, podcast. You can do phrase videos, like I said in the beginning of this convo. News in slow, that series, News in Slow Spanish, News in Slow French. because I have some examples in my database. Uh, let's see, get ready with me's. What else did I write down here? Actually, let me go check what else I wrote down as examples. But yeah, the podcasts. And really, my first step, I should say, is literally going on Google and just typing in comprehensible input for X language and just seeing what comes up. Sometimes I have to then go listening practice for this language, or reading practice for this language, because again, comprehensible input isn't just audio. It's also reading. It's anything you're consuming, anything that is input related. So listening or reading content. So for example, like I have a book right here, which I showed last time on a live and I still have not gotten through it. Yo no soy tu perfecta hija mexicana, which is like, I'm not your perfect Mexican daughter. This to me would be comprehensible input because I can pretty much understand what's going on here. But for a beginner speaker in Spanish, this might be really complicated. This might be too complex and, not comprehensible input. They might have to start off with something a lot simpler. So choose the resource, preview it, give yourself the grace of knowing you might have to switch it. That is okay. You might just put it on a list and say, okay, when I reach X level, when I'm more intermediate, I'm going to come back to it. Because that's also a good way to gauge your skill. So you find that resource, and then, like I said, you decide what strategy. Are you doing intensive listening? So listening really carefully, because then you are going to do things like write down the vocab you don't understand. But with comprehensive input, what I would recommend is, rather than looking up those words you don't know in the dictionary, I would write out the definition based on what is being said in the text or the audio. So, like, for example, in the podcast I was listening to, she talked about trains. I'm just going to give a simple word. Like if she said like dinsha and I didn't know what that was, I would listen to how she's talking about dinsha. And then I would write down, I guess it's something that like goes from a place to a place and it carries people, because that's kind of how she described it. But I would write that in Japanese. And then I would continue to develop that idea, because it's forcing me to listen carefully to see how much I'm understanding. It's forcing me to unpack what's being said versus just listening and moving on. That would be my personal thing that I would try as an example for intensive listening. If I'm doing extensive listening, which is just like listening, immersion, you're not really trying to focus on words you don't know, I would listen to it, check with myself. Hey, how much did I understand, Bront'e? Okay, I kind of didn't understand, or my brain drifted off towards the end. Okay, we're moving on. And I go to the next audio and I'll listen to that one and the next one. And I would do a similar thing for reading practice. So that's kind of the gist of like comprehensible input. Again, one of my favorite strategies, what I love to use for my own language studies. So now I'm checking in with TikTok and YouTube people. How many of you have already used in your language studies comprehensible input? You found, whether you knew the name or not, you're like, oh yeah, I do some monolingual studies, or yeah, I found some resources and I kind of try to understand it without looking up definitions, or I've never tried that before, never even heard of it until you said it, Bront'e, and I'm going to try that at some point. Let me know in the chat while I scroll down in my notes for the next thing we're going to be chatting about. I know the popular one that lots of people were talking or saying that they do, which is shadowing. So you dabbled in it, but like to use it more. Absolutely. And I was thinking, it's just me throwing ideas out, but I would love to have, because I already have a course on the sentence building one, I would love to develop more on these other strategies, because I feel like even when we look them up online and someone's like, oh yes, go and do some listen and repeat, we still have to identify for ourselves, what does that look like? How much of an audio should I listen? For those of us who have lots of questions and need more examples, we're like, okay, well, what kind of audio is a good listen and repeat audio? How many times should I listen and repeat? What should I do after that? And so I want to help to answer those questions. And also it helps me to sort of solidify in my mind when I'm sharing these strategies with other people, what do I mean when I say that? I usually prefer regular non-language learner focused content, since sometimes the comprehensible stuff can feel a little bit boring, even if it's useful for my studies. Yes, I do find that for honestly some YouTube videos, the podcasts that I find are better, but it also just might be the ones that I look at, because there are some that I found on like Spotify, for example, that also are kind of boring. So I definitely agree. And that's why I say at some point you might switch to like the Get Ready With Me's, or there's another version that I'm not remembering the words for. And then Kara over on TikTok. I try to do this daily. Listen to true crime podcasts. Ooh. Find a story you'll already know, but in Spanish. Nice. Looking for stuff with a lot of emotion. I love that. So yeah, shadowing practice with music, with phrase, videos, story time. That's what I was looking for. Not Get Ready With Me, although that helps too, but story time videos. So whatever that word is in the language that you're learning, people who are sitting down on YouTube and are like, okay, I got a story for you. Let me tell you about the time when that's a perfect type of content to listen to and be like, did I understand did I understand the tea that they were sharing in this video or not? And it gives you, I mean, especially if that's the kind of things that you listen to, like if these are the ways that you speak with your friends. If it's not, it's just good content anyway, in my opinion. But love this strategy. So now we're going to go into, that was for shadowing, but that still works. We're going to go into shadowing. So if you've never heard of shadowing before, and you've also never heard me talk about it, although like I said, I know some people here have, shadowing is essentially repeating what is being said in an audio, piece of content, whether it's a podcast or a video. But it's different than listen and repeat. So listen and repeat is you hear it, you pause, then you say it after. Shadowing is you listen, it's still going, you have to keep up. And so as they're talking, you have to say the things that they're saying. And a lot of times, especially in the beginning, or if it's a new piece of content, it kind of comes out like gibberish. But this is really helpful for a lot of things, like improving your intonation, so your ability to say sentences in the like cadence and the way that native speakers say it. It helps you to, for example, if it's more natural content where people are just talking and it's not scripted, you also get to hear and practice how people pause in sentences in conversation. Like all of those things that we do in English, for example. But it's like I said, it's different than listen and repeat, because part of the work that you have to do is keep up with the audio. Now, if it's something long, like a movie or a TV show, you might want to break it up into chunks. But usually I do this with things like podcasts or YouTube videos that are no longer than 15 minutes. And I'm just like, no. Just saying what they're saying. I don't care if it's right or not. No one's listening to me. No one's editing my voice. But I know that this is really helpful because it's getting my mouth used to saying the words, especially words that I might trip up on. It's getting me used to how to say words in a sentence, because when we say words in isolation, it's very different than how they're said together. So even like as I'm talking right now, but I would actually just say as I'm talking right now. So the way that we sort of squish words together in a sentence is very different than how we would say them in isolation. And when you're doing the shadowing work, you get to hear people say it and you get to practice doing that too. So for example, this has been really helpful for me with my Spanish, because like my focus is more Colombian Spanish, but sometimes I try to look at like Dominican Spanish, and it's been really helpful because sometimes words in Spanish, like in most languages, I can't say all because I don't know all, but in most languages, words are squished together and there are some syllables that are kind of cut off and some that are attached in unique ways. And you're like, wait, did you actually say this part or no? But when it's together, it sounds slightly different. versus when it's in isolation. So it's really good to help with that. Like, for example, some of the things that I'll listen to in Spanish, it'll say like, or I'll just like name a song that I like para la cultura instead of para la cultura. So like, for the culture, it's pa, but I know it's also para. And so being able to practice that in a more natural sounding way is really, really powerful. But I want to point out, to just share some things to keep in mind, some things to be aware of and avoid when you're trying to do the shadowing practice. So the first thing is falling into like a perfectionist trap, falling into this space of, I gotta say everything right the first time. I have to, not make a mistake. I have to sound intelligible and say all the word. No, this is not a test. This is not an exam. No one is going to hire or fire you based off of your shadowing skills, and also no one is perfect. So give yourself permission to be a little silly, to have fun with it, and to keep going. And the second thing is really, generally speaking, don't pause. If you trip up on a word or you missed it because you were trying to shadow the last thing and they kept talking, just keep going. Just pick up where you left off and just keep going. Mistakes are the whole point. How else can you learn? Absolutely, Sam. How else can you learn if you're not making mistakes? Because the mistakes tell you what not to do so that you can hone in on what you should be doing instead. 100%. So yeah, you listen to it. Don't pause. Try it again after, like literally listen to it once and do the shadowing and then go, okay, I'm going to take a break. Maybe like mentally need to get away from it. And then I'm going to come back to it and do it again. And you'll do shadowing for the second time. And maybe you'll focus specifically on the parts where you're like, I tripped up there. I tripped up there. Maybe another strategy you could do is actually listen first. So listen only to the entire audio and then go a second time in shadowing if you feel like you need to actually hear it first. And it's the first time you're listening to this content. But really, the goal is listen and say the things at the same time as the speaker, because it's going to ultimately help you with a lot of the micro skills that are involved in speaking, your pronunciation, your intonation. If you're focusing on actual words, so listening carefully to the vocab they're using and the grammar, it can help you understand things in context. But really, it's like, sometimes we have to get our mouths used to saying the words that we're not used to saying and make, the sounds in another language that we're not used to saying, and build up that stamina for speaking in another language. We underestimate the power or the importance of building up your stamina for things like this. Because I don't know about the rest of the people, but I know for myself, when I first start learning a new language that has a lot of different and unique sounds, like my jaw gets sore. I mean, it's also because I'm exaggerating the sounds. Like I'm trying to enunciate in like I said, an exaggerated way, because I know if I exaggerate and go to the extreme when I'm in conversation, it's going to decrease, which means I'm probably going to be saying things the right way. But also, I tend to have fun with things when I'm like walking around the house, recording myself, just chit chatting, all those different things. So it takes practice. You have to build up that skill. Like we have 20 plus, however old you are, years of speaking our native language. Our brains are used to hearing it. Our ears are used to hearing it. Our mouths are used to saying the things that we say. And that's also why, if any person has ever tried to do like an accent, an English accent, a different accent in English, you find it tricky to keep it up because you haven't built up the skill of doing it. That's why they have like trainers for people with accents when they're acting and things like that. So you have to build it up. So how does this work? How do you actually do the thing? How do you do the shadowing? Find the audio that you want to practice with, similar to comprehensible input. It can be audio. It can be podcasts. It can be, it has to be audio, but it can be podcasts. It can be music. You can do this with music, 100%. The News and Slow series, YouTube videos, movies, Movies is a great one, especially if you have a favorite movie. Again, going back to Disney, you can just have a whole scene where you're acting out the scene with the characters. And this honestly makes me remember probably almost 7, 8 years ago when I was going through school teaching. One of the kids, it was around the time when Frozen, the original, like Frozen 1 came out. And one of the kids was reenacting the entire scene when Elsa is singing Let It Go. Like the entire scene, standing up on, the highest point and flaring out the skirt and magic, like all of it. She had all of it down. Like that could be you in another language. And I'm not exaggerating, but I think sometimes we have to have fun with our process. And so you could literally go, okay, this whole scene in a movie, that's going to be me. I'm going to be pretending to be that character and trying to say the lines as they're saying it in the shadowing practice. I've shadowed with YouTube videos and songs. I didn't think to do it with movies. Yes. We need, one of the most important things is to have fun with this process, because if we're not having fun with our language studies, it is easier to give up and to lose confidence in ourselves. So whatever way that you can build in fun, do it. If you love to belt songs, whether you can sing or not, through your house, find a song and shadow. Just sing the song over and over again with the singer. But your goal is not just to sing the song. It's to sing the song like the singer. Your goal is not to reenact the scene and shadow with the actor in a movie. It's to reenact the scene exactly like the actor or actress. To say the words as they've said it, to pause when they pause, to raise your voice when they raise their voice, and to lower your voice when they lower theirs, because you want to, again, get a feel for it in your body, all the parts that help us to speak. You want to get that used to talking in a different language. And it's going to 100% make it easier for you to actually talk to people now in the future. So this is one of the strategies that I definitely recommend for my introvert people, for my shy people, or my people who are just like, I don't want to talk to native speakers all the time because it drains my energy. Shadowing is one of the things that you can do. Comprehensible input will help to build your sort of phrase bank in your mind. The shadowing practice will help you with pronunciation and intonation. And then the sentence building will help you to actually practice making sentences, because conversation happens when we're making sentences. And if you're not confident in doing that, you have to practice either with a person who's going to give you immediate feedback or on your own with a very strategic strategy or two. So let's see, what else do I have for the shadowing before I forget? Yeah, play, start shadowing. Yeah, it's okay if what you're saying is kind of gibberish, because you're just trying to keep up and preserve the intonation. And then you get to try again and have fun with the process. So before I move on to the last one, well, a couple things. Let me check to see how we're doing. How are we doing over on YouTube and TikTok? Any questions so far? We talked about comprehensible input. We've talked about shadowing as 2 of the 3 strategies that I love for my language studies. So if you have any questions about those, or you want more clarity on either of those things, let me know as I'm readjusting screens. Loving it so far. Love to hear it. Absolutely love to hear it. I mean, if you couldn't already tell, I could talk about this all day. Actually, let me see. As of today, because I write down all these topics for live streams based on things I've talked about before, and I've seen really good conversations, in comments, or based on things that people ask me, usually over on TikTok, but sometimes in email. And so I write down these topics. So as of right now, I have, let's see, I think like 60 topics, if not more, that I plan to talk about at some point. Everything's lagging right now because I'm switching stuff in Notion and I shouldn't have done that. But where are we? So should movies be watched with subtitles in the target language? It depends on what you're trying to do and what type of subtitles. If you mean subtitles in your native language, I usually don't recommend that because we can easily use them as a crutch. But I also still use them many times. But I prefer, actually, when I'm actively studying, I prefer either no subtitles at all or subtitles in the language that I'm listening to or subtitles in another language. So, for example, listening to something in or watching a video in Japanese or a movie in Japanese. Netflix allows for a lot of different like subtitle options, and I know YouTube as well. So I might put the Japanese movie or video with Japanese subtitles, or I might watch the Japanese video with Korean subtitles because it's helping me to master two different languages that are not my native language. So, but it also depends. Like, what is the goal in watching this? Is the goal to train your ear in understanding? Then I might just completely turn the subtitles off. But I also know, as a native English speaker, I still keep subtitles on English content because it just helps me to understand better when I'm reading and watching at the same time. So I think it's a personal preference, but for the sake of learning, I usually don't keep like my native English subtitles on a non-English content piece, just because I personally know there was a video that I watched of someone, I don't remember her name on YouTube. One of my favorite YouTubers who speaks Japanese. She did an interview with someone else who in Japanese was like, when we have subtitles, or in the case of Japanese, when you have furigana, we read like this. And we read around the kanji and we never actually look at it. So when we have English subtitles, we're reading the words on the screen and we're not actively listening and training our ears to understand the words. And it's a crutch. So I would personally have same subtitles as the audio content or a different language other than my non-native. It takes you effort to not talk about language. It takes you effort. Got to put tape over my mouth. Well, see, that's why I love these lives, because then I get to talk about language learning stuff all the time. And I'm like, if you don't want to hear me talk about it, then you shouldn't be here. This is not the place for you. And you've done that. Watch a show in Russian with Japanese subtitles. It is a wild experience. It absolutely is a wild experience because your brain, like, for example, I have a couple podcasts actually that I love where it's doing a similar like brain tingle because it's a podcast that's in Japanese and Korean. And I'm like, I understand you, but I don't know what language you're speaking for like the first 5 seconds of them talking each time. So yeah, it's definitely similar. This is hard for me because I don't want to miss any context in my shows. So then what I would recommend is watch the show. Yeah, so what Sam is saying, watch the show multiple times. Absolutely. And what you could do is watch the show first with the English subtitles so that you actually understand what's going on, and then watch it again with, no subtitles. Or you could watch it without subtitles first, see how much you understand. Watch it again without subtitles. Did I pick up anything new? And then the third time, watch it with English subtitles and go, okay, now how much do I understand now? So you could, there's so many different orientations that you could do with this. And I'm trying to think, what would I personally do? I know that I would use English subtitles as a crutch. So I would probably listen to it without subtitles a couple times and then put the English subtitles on at the end. Except if I'm using it as comprehensible input. If I'm using it as comprehensible input, I will listen to it without subtitles a few times. And then I'm just going to move on and say, hopefully I understood most of what was being said, and keep on moving. And thank you for subscribing over on YouTube. Is it Dano? I hope I'm saying one of those is right. Please let me know how to say your name. Yes, Kemushi-chan. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it was a Koyatte yomu. That was the video. Cool. That's all I remember from that one video. I always hear it in my head anytime I have subtitles on that are in English. I just hear her in I think it was the person from Nihongo no Mori, I think. And it was they were like, Koyatte yomu. Like, we read this way. Yep, that was exactly who it was. And that happens in Terrace House. I was so confused when they started speaking Korean. Oh, yeah. But see, my brain is like, why do I understand you, but it sounds off? Like it doesn't sound like Japanese, but is I'm not, it takes my brain a minute to switch. Always remember that joke. 100, 100%. All right. So how are we doing with time? Let me check. Let's see. Okay, 45. We're good. So if you're just tuning in, hello. I realized I didn't even introduce myself to the people who are watching. Hello, my name is Bront'e. I'm a language coach, which means that I help people learn multiple languages. So whatever languages you are trying to learn, that's what I do in various ways through my courses, through my resources, and fairly newly, that's not English, and most recently, through my language coaching membership. And so today we're talking about 3 different topics. We talked about comprehensible input. We just finished talking about shadowing, and I'm going to go into my final and probably most favorite, at least for right now, strategy, which is sentence building. And that happened with my partner. I said something to him in Russian and responded in English and didn't even realize I said it. Yeah. But the reason why I'm not bothered by that is because I love multilingual conversation. So I know that there are some people, because I've seen like TikTok videos on it, where some people hate when they're trying to talk to someone in the language that they're learning and they immediately respond in English or in their native language as a response. Usually it's English. I'm like, I love that. Yes, I would love to hear them respond to me in the language I'm talking right now, but I love multilingual conversations. In college, I used to have friends where we would all speak a different language. It was like 3 languages in a conversation. It was English, Spanish, and Japanese. And we would just all talk to each other in a different language. That's my favorite thing. That is like goals, to continue to have friends that I can talk to, and we're all speaking a different language at the table. Like that to me is so fun, but I recognize that that's not fun for everyone. See, multilingual convos is the dream. I'm glad that you agree with that. So let's see, we talked about comprehensible input, we talked about shadowing, and now we're going into sentence building, which is, like I said, one of my favorite strategies. And so I'm trying to organize my screen again. There we go. Or almost. There we go. So I keep saying one of my favorite strategies. I'm sharing all 3 of my favorite strategies, but the one that I have been using over the past, I would say 2 months actively, like I redefined what sentence building means to me. I made it really clear for myself. And then I created a course around it because I literally was like, what does the me right now need in order to get better at Russian? Because I procrastinate with Russian. I'm like, I don't understand enough. And I put myself in this cycle when it comes to Russian. I don't understand enough in Russian. So I can't look at the resources that are going to help me understand Russian because I don't understand enough in Russian. So I can't look up the resources. And I literally, this is the cycle. So I have to break this cycle. I cannot continue for another year saying I'm going to get better at this language and not. So I was like, well, what's the biggest barrier right now? For me, input is easy. Listening and reading is something that I can do passively. I can do actively. I can put a podcast on the side. I can read content, write down, take notes down. That's easy. What's hard for me is output because it takes action. And if you don't know this about me, I am an innovative language learner. It's part of my quiz, but I am someone who is good at reflecting and revising, but I will continue reflecting and revising until something or myself pushes me into action. I will continue to do the thinking and the planning and never the actual work if I don't break the cycle. So yeah, the cycle's too real. So I was like, sentence building. I know that sentence building is really powerful. And I broke down, step by step what it's all about. And I focus, even though sentence building can be used for all of the skills, so speaking, listening, reading, writing, I focus on how can I use sentence building to help me with my speaking and my writing, because those are the things that I needed most help with, or needed help with the most. And so I really thought about, well, when it comes to speaking, what are the different parts of speaking? And when it comes to writing, what are the different parts? So what makes up someone who is able to, I don't want to say fluently, like conversationally speak to someone or write down their thoughts without too much trouble. Like, what does it take? What are the micro skills that are involved in that? Sentence building is one of those, and it touches on the others. So I was like, okay, then that's what we're doing. But yeah, it's really about understanding parts of a sentence, how they work, how they connect, so that you can start creating your own sentences together. Because really, we talk in phrases. As speakers of whatever native language is your native language, or, if you have multiple languages you're fluent in, we talk in phrases. We generally have set phrases in our minds that we know to pull out to convey a specific piece of information. So, we generally, I know that's a phrase, or we generally use, like those are set phrases in my brain that I know I can use to convey something that I'm trying to say, versus individual words. We generally rely on individual words when we're in thinking mode or when we're using words for the first time. But for some reason, when we're learning a different language, we default to learning exclusively by individual words, which, in context does not make much sense. We need to focus on piecing together all of our thoughts like we do in our native language. There are chunks of information that we learn to use, and we kind of mix it up and play around with the order. We play around with the structure. We pull out a word and replace it with something else. Like we do all these different things in our native language, and we just need to translate that practice with the languages that we're learning. What was that? I think we're okay. It probably was my cat, because he likes to just pop in and ask for attention. But sentence building is also really great for helping you to memorize vocab and grammar. So I actually just had this conversation with two people that are currently in my membership, because they're both trying to find ways of practicing the words that they're learning. And both people just so happen to be like me, where they're like, I don't like flashcards. Like literally today I had an office hours call, and one of my people was like, Bront'e, I use flashcards. I like them. I hate creating them. I don't want to do that. And so when people come to me and they tell me they don't like flashcards because they do not work for everyone, and you have to be okay with that. My recommendation is usually something along the lines of sentence building. Talking about flashcards is a whole other conversation, and we can definitely do that in another live. But one of the things that you want to keep in mind when you're using a sentence building strategy is avoiding translation as a long-term strategy. Translation's great. Translation is helpful. It can be helpful. But translation is a completely different skill. Like, people go to school to learn how to be translators. Whether you feel people need to go to school for that or not, it is a skill that has to be practiced and built. We generally are not trying to be like professional translators. Yes, there are some people who are. But if that is not your goal with the language, do not focus on translation long term. Short term, yes, great. And I use it for my own studies. But at some point, we need to shift to what we said in the beginning, comprehensible input, the monolingual studies. So just be careful about using sentence building and constantly translating the sentences that you're finding and the sentences that you're creating. You don't need to do that if you kind of understand what is being said. What I generally do as a rule is I actually just define the words I don't know in the sentence instead of writing the whole sentence out. Except, I just remembered, except if I'm doing it in non-English languages. So for example, if I'm writing down and practicing sentences in Korean, I will write those sentences in Japanese too, completely. It's helping me with my Japanese, but I will not write those sentences in English. I might circle a word in the Korean or the original Korean sentence and then write the English above it if I don't even know it in Japanese either. But I'm not going to translate the whole sentence in English. That's just my way from the beginning, how I do it. But that doesn't mean I don't use translation at all. I absolutely do. but it's not my default. And it's only if I'm really struggling to understand the sentence. And it's usually when it's grammar, when there's grammar that's being used that I really don't get. I haven't seen it before. I don't understand how it's conveying information. And usually it's in an Asian language. Like I remember for the longest time struggling to understand like yo ni and yo na, which has so many different definitions. You have to see it in context. But I needed a lot of translated sentences to help me start to understand. So just don't use translation for long term unless you're trying to be a translator. So insightful. Easiest thing for me to say are phrases that I've internalized. Absolutely. So rather than, because if we don't internalize and use these phrases in these chunks, then what we're often doing is saying, okay, I want to tell my friend that I want to go to the beach. So, okay, and then to want. Okay, how do I conjugate to want for I? Okay, I want, and then to go. So the dictionary form, and like you're literally piecing together this sentence, and by the time you say it out, it's like 3 minutes later. Rather than, having a chunk in your mind, I want to go. I want to see. I don't want to go. I don't want to see. I don't want to visit. Having those chunked in your mind as a set phrase. And I actually have, I haven't done this lately, honestly, but in the past, I definitely created my own phrase book where I would write these things down and I would say them out loud to get used to hearing it together. So that whenever I needed it, I wasn't conjugating the verbs because I knew when I wanted to convey me wanting to do something, it was this phrase, not these 4 words strung together. So it's very, very helpful for that. I think that was the only really big mistake that I wrote down, but, yeah, just don't rely on translation too often or for too long, and really give yourself the same grace as what we do in English, and knowing that it's okay to play around with the sentence and have a little fun. I have made more serious sentences when I'm practicing, and I have done more silly sentences. In college, me and my friends, when we were learning Japanese together, we would literally take like all the vocabulary in the chapter and try to make one sentence out of every single vocabulary word. It was a really long sentence. It didn't make logical sense, but every word was used correctly. And then we would like show it to our teacher and be like, look at the weird sentence we made for this chapter. She would get a giggle and be like, that doesn't make sense. But it was good practice for us because it forced us to conjugate. It forced us to modify sentences. And it was fun because, again, we have to make these things fun as much as possible. So how do you do it? Well, I break it down in full in my course. So if you want that, Sentence Building Pro is the course and it's literally just $9. But long, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Simplified version of what I teach in the course is essentially find sentences that you want to learn. So do some sentence mining. You can find sentences that are using grammar that you want to learn, vocab you want to learn, etc. Record them somewhere. So write them down somewhere, put them in a Notion template, write them down in your notebook. You can even have a log on your phone of recordings, and then use those sentences as a model to make more sentences. That's really the core of what I teach, but I break it down further and I give a lot more examples in that program. And like I said, I created it for the me who was like, I will not continue this cycle of Russian, saying I can't use this podcast until I understand more, but I can't understand more until I use this podcast. I do not want to continue that cycle. And so far, it's been really helpful. Like I've been building my own little phrase deck in Notion and just writing out things in Russian. And then what I've been doing personally is I have done some translation strategies. So translating the Russian into French, because that's my laddering structure. If you've never heard of laddering languages is essentially using a non-native language to help you learn another. So French is my language that helps you with my Russian. So if I don't understand anything in Russian, I look it up in French. And so I was writing translations in French, and then I would take the sentence and really just play around with the structure and the sentence, the parts because I know what the parts are. I just need more practice in using them, especially because foreign language like Russian that has cases, I still am like, I kind of know what these cases are, but sometimes, most of the time, I still don't fully get it. So this has been really helpful because I feel more confident now. I feel more confident now with the Russian cases, for example, than I did 2 months ago when I was still procrastinating with my Russian studies entirely. So I hope that that's helpful, just as like a connection to know that you are not alone in trying to figure these things out. Um, Testing out doing themed months. In November will be writing month. Nice. Definitely going to dive back into the sentence course. I'm so excited to hear that. And I have to do like a refresh because in the community we're doing, this is like the last week of the sentence bingo challenge, I guess we'll call it. But yeah, I have to figure out. Actually, I was gonna try to do another live this week, crossing my fingers, hope I can, because part of what I wanted to focus on was creating my schedule for my own language studies for the next quarter, because we finish September and then we'll be in the October, November, December, which is Q4. And I have to figure out what this is going to look like and be really strategic. So yeah, I don't know what my theme for this quarter is going to be. I might switch around what languages I'm focusing on. I have to do some reflection before the 30th. Yeah. Which is Saturday. Okay. But that's kind of what I'm focused on right now. It's like, these are my strategies I know I love. And so if they feel supportive for the goals that I have for, my guiding principle, my why for learning and all those different pieces, then I'm going to incorporate these into my plan, into my schedule, into my routine. But sentence building is probably going to be one that I keep because I personally underestimated the power of that. Comprehensible input, I do anyway. Like, it is my go-to. I just listen to things that are just above my level, or I'm reading things that are just above my level. Like, sometimes I'm reading fan fiction in, like Spanish or French, and I'm like, I get to read fan fiction about my favorite show, and I get to do it for, language practice. Any way that I can incorporate language learning and my hobbies, I find a way, which is also why I love playing video games in other languages. So that's also my comprehensible input: video games in other languages, music, podcasts are my go-to, and sometimes fan fiction, but not often, because sometimes I'm like, I don't want to have to struggle through the story to like get through it. I'm going to just like pick up this book instead and I'll read through that. And then shadowing is something that I do with podcasts. I haven't, I guess over the past year or so, I haven't had a formal reason to focus on shadowing, but sometimes when I'm listening to content, I'll just start shadowing. Like I said earlier today, I was listening to 2 podcasts in Japanese and I just started shadowing what she was saying. It's like, I don't understand every word. There's a couple words she used that I was like, I don't know. But just the practice of speaking and saying what she is saying is helpful to me, especially because Japanese is a language that I don't speak as often as I used to. Like in college, not only was I taking classes, but my friends and I were so, honestly, obsessed that we would speak the language for almost 12 hours every day. It was like we were living in Japan because we made an immersion for ourselves. We would talk to each other outside of class. We started a Japanese language and culture club. Like, we did all the things to make it a part of our lives. So we were talking in Japanese. Like, we'd go to like the cafes on campus and talk in Japanese. We would be hanging out, on the lawn, talking in Japanese, texting each other, everything. So I went from this heavy immersion to solo just because we didn't have the same, circumstances. We're not going to classes and doing all those same things anymore. And it's a little tricky when that situation switches. So now I got to build it back up, but it's going to happen. But I think I've talked about my 3 topics. Now it's just like free time, I think. So if you have any questions, maybe about the 3 strategies I shared, so comprehensible input, shadowing, and sentence building. If you are not sure of how to use them, or you have clarifying questions like Bront'e, in this specific context, what would you recommend? I am all for additional questions while I finally drink some water because I've been talking the entire time. And for those of you who have been hanging out this entire time on TikTok and on YouTube, appreciate you guys so much. And if you missed any, that is me live with the volume up on my phone. There we go. And if you've missed any part of this live, don't worry, because what I tend to do is I will cut up this longer video into smaller pieces and it'll be posted on my YouTube channel. So you might already see on my channel, we're almost finished with the second live that I did. The first one was on laddering languages and study audit. So how to audit your studies, figure out what's working and not working, and then the laddering strategy. The more recent one was on, I think it was building your confidence as a language learner, how to restart your language studies, and study schedules, the 4 types of schedules that I recommend and teach, you know, when it comes to creating a schedule. So check those out. Definitely look up those. And then these videos will at some point be available on my channel in the future. So yeah, that's my spiel. That's what I've got for this more formal video. But like I said, I am open to hanging out and chit-chatting. Let me know. Actually, one thing I would love to hear from those of you who are still here watching, if you've used, because we talked about using comprehensible input and shadowing. How many of you use sentence building in your own studies? I know, Sam, you are in the course. And we just chatted about that. But if anybody else is planning to use sentence building or you have used it before, let me know. As I'm like making sure YouTube is working okay. This is the one of the things I have to keep checking, because early on in some of the beginning lives that I did, because I go live on TikTok more often, that I'm more familiar with the platform. But when I started to go on YouTube, there was one live where for some reason OBS had my audio so messed up the entire time, and I didn't notice until the last 10 minutes. So now I'm hyper focused on checking. You do currently. Nice article. Yeah, I definitely love it. And like, for example, what could be a really good one? Like this. I think this would be a good example for sentence building. So this is Talk to Me in Korean. If you're not learning Korean or you've never heard of them before, this might not be familiar to you. This is their My Weekly Korean Vocabulary book. This is the second one. And so, for example, what I would do is I would literally go in here. This would be my comprehensible input, because I would look at the sentences and maybe like cover the English translations and just go, how much of these do I understand in reading them? It's not, you know, a cohesive text, but they do at some point go into, probably not going to be able to see it well on the camera. They go into longer sentences. I would also, they usually have audio attached to this. So I would go and find the audio on their website, and I would use it as shadowing as well, because as they're saying these sentences and phrases, I'm going to say it with them. And then I'm going to use this for sentence building. And I pull out a few sentences and then rewrite them and swap out words and swap out things. So you could find one resource, for example, that helps you to do all 3 of these strategies if this is your plan, if that's what you want to do. And then similarly, I think this one has an audiobook. So this is just the beginner one that I keep rereading, but short stories in French. And so similarly, comprehensible input if you're beginner intermediate. If you're advanced, it's probably too easy. So it's not comprehensible input, but it is good for your confidence. And then you'll read through, you can listen with the audio and follow along and read out loud. I do that with French a lot, shadowing with French, because I did not learn French formally. I learned French solo, literally by asking a friend who speaks French. It's like, how do you say this word? How do you say that word? Now, how do you conjugate it? Okay, so if I put in a sentence, is it this? That's literally how I learned French for a year. So I did not sit and formally practice pronunciation, which means that my pronunciation sucks. So I need shadowing practice to help me with that. But just wanted to share some other ways that I personally do it, because I know for myself, it helps anytime I'm trying to figure out like what strategies to use, what ways to organize my language studies. Examples help, seeing how other people are doing it so I can adapt and figure out what works better for me. That is really helpful for myself and my studies. So I always try to give lots of examples in what I'm teaching and what I'm sharing. But if there are no other questions, then I think that we are done for today. But I'm going to try to get back into the habit of lives, even if they're co-working ones. And then you guys can join me. We'll get some things done together. We'll chit chat, answer questions, all of that fun stuff that I would usually do, but I haven't done for the past couple weeks. But I'm back. I am back. So I want to thank everybody who is here, especially if you stuck it out for the entire time. I appreciate you so much. And if you haven't already subscribed, please do, because then you're going to get notified for future lives that I do, future videos that I post over on YouTube. And if you're on TikTok, make sure to follow me so that you don't miss any of the content that I post. Because my TikTok content, I have to say, it's pretty funny sometimes. But also I answer a lot of questions over on TikTok. So if you put a question in the comments, I'm probably going to make a video response and share it over there. So follow me in all the places. Any other things that I want to share before I forget? No, I think that's it. So we are done. I'm going to first be saying bye to everyone on TikTok. So bye, TikTok friends. I will see you. I'm not going to guarantee tomorrow. Sometime this week. I will see you sometime this week. Bye, everybody on TikTok. All right. And now I'm with YouTube people. So again, thank you everybody who's been hanging out here. I don't think there's anything else I need to say. If you want resources for learning languages, I have tons of resources. They should be linked on my main channel page. My guide is also in the description if you want to grab that. And also just anytime, ask me questions. I love answering language learning questions. I love to talk about learning languages. This is what I do. This is my job. But also I'm just a nerd when it comes to all of this. So thank you so much. I will see you all in another live stream or, on the interweb somewhere at some place sometime.